Hey everybody, this is Eric Mueller, the host of The Eric Mueller Show. You're tuned in to the podcast that explores what makes any successful person's inner clock tick by unlocking the most impactful tools within their success portfolios. I'm joined today by Dr. Eric Daimler, a leading authority in robotics and artificial intelligence. Eric's had over 20 years of experience as an entrepreneur, investor, technologist, and policymaker. Eric has even worked with the White House on artificial intelligence. Let's head on over to the interview. Eric, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's good to be here, Eric.
Man, I'm excited for this one. When I was looking for a guest on AI, I was really excited about your background. I was really eager to really get you on here. But before we dive deep into your entrepreneurial story and your expertise within AI, we want to know what makes up your success portfolio. So if you're new to the show here, let me just give you a quick background. I look at it like an investment portfolio. That's compilation of investments, lays foundation for financial goals. Well, here on the Eric Mueller Show, I want to discover how successful people like Eric invest in themselves and build the foundation for their success. So Eric, start us off. What are some skills or traits, habits or mindsets that make up your success portfolio?
I'm fortunate to have chose my parents well. So I had a lot of habits just kind of given to me, I guess, through osmosis. I don't know if there was any one that would occur as somehow novel. My parents certainly read a lot, and they certainly were hard workers. They had investments in residential real estate that kept them quite busy in addition to their jobs. So that I spent my weekends with them, if not doing ordinary activities one would do when you're young. I spent time working in their business. So we were always working. This was not a relaxing endeavor, being a young kid in my family, but that has served me well because I've found that working and learning and growing is maybe not anything new, but it's really, I've been really grateful to have been given those habits at a young age.
Yeah, and looking at your background, Eric, I mean, you're obviously a very well-educated individual in terms of schooling. You've had stints at the University of Washington, Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon. Was that something that you had always planned throughout your life to go through that much schooling, and become a doctor to get a PhD?
In some respect, I thought that was interesting, but really, no. I really just always wanted to learn and grow, and the education really just came along with it. It really was just a natural outgrowth.
Okay. Yeah, and the thing that I thought was really interesting is that when you were at Carnegie Mellon or shortly thereafter with getting your PhD, you really drove an initiative to get entrepreneurship going there and, the Silicon Valley-based campus. And that's really something that I think back to my schooling. And I went to St. Olaf College in Northfield. And really, when I was an undergrad, I was not even at the point of thinking entrepreneurially at that point. I mean, I was so early in terms of that thought process. And so I think what you're doing there and what you've set up there, that's so incredibly beneficial for those students that think that way at that age.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't know you went to that college. I think it's a really great reputation. I've one of my in-laws, I guess you could say, went there. So good school, good people. I was just always clamoring for a really good education for myself. I was at what people would regard as probably a pretty good high school in Seattle, but I wanted something more. So it's part of my Boy Scout Eagle project. When I was like 12, I think, I solicited a campaign to get bus service out to my newly developed suburb east of Seattle. The result of which was a new bus service so that I could then go to the University of Washington in Seattle and take classes. This sounds terribly precocious, but that's what I did just because I wanted tougher classes that normally something you'd find kids don't really want to do. And it sounds weird even to describe it now, but that's what I did.
Yeah, well, and you really perfectly described like just how an entrepreneur thinks is what problems affect you. So you saw the problem of transportation affecting you to be able to get you to that school to take those classes. That's a great way to think. I mean, I think I'm noticing my brain continues to go more to that way as I develop, as I learn, as I speak to people like yourself in regard to how you can think like a businessman or woman. And another good point that talking about school brings up is that when you're in school and you have traditional assignments and different types of metrics in which to measure success with grades, you get kind of a certain definition of success maybe in your mind as far as what you need to do to be successful there. I'm curious for you right now what your definition of success is, and has that changed throughout the course of your life and career?
Very early in my life, I wanted to just have a full expression in my job. Somehow I got it in my head when I was, I think, 9 or 10, when I had my very first computer. This is a long time ago. And I had I don't know, quite an out-of-body experience, but really a visceral feeling, even at that young age, that computers, this new tool that my parents had got me and I built from a kit, was going to allow people, in this case me, to become more human. I just remember working with this computer and programming it, such that it was back then, thinking, wow, it does what I want. This has a seemingly infinite number of expressions. And I could see, even at that young age, I remember this part pretty clearly, that this world is going to expand and become more and more available to me. It certainly fits the narrative of people finding careers where, I think the story goes something like, any technology that happens before you're 10 or 15 is just background. It feels like it was always here. Any technology that was invented between the time you're 15 and say 30 is something that you can take advantage of and build a career on. And then any technology invented after you're 30 or 35 is against the law of nature. Right? And so, that's probably explains a good deal of why this took off for me at the time it did. Fortunate timing, fortunate parents, and I just immediately grabbed onto it with the opportunities that were afforded to me. I find that continues, that I have always looked to computers as a tool to have a broader population express more of themselves. Even though I really had computers surrounding me, kind of growing up in a basement, I was that nerd. I've always oriented myself around wanting people to use these tools and developing tools to allow others to just enjoy their jobs more. Pete, we talk about automation a lot. I know we started this off talking about AI, but just generally automation is something that we only do for jobs that we don't want to do. I don't want to automate, being with you in this conversation, or automate, being with my family. I want to automate the traditionally, dangerous and dirty, right? These unpleasant jobs, as they say. That's what I've always been orienting myself to provide. It continued when I was a researcher and into my time in public service, and even today, when we have a commercial expression, I'll also spend time trying to put that commercial expression into some other activities where we don't get paid, but can provide a real positive outcome to a broader set of the population.
Yeah, Eric, that's a wonderful point about the automation. That's really not, I haven't thought about it in that way yet, because there's elements of this podcast, there's elements of, a business that I run with my buddy online that automating seems so nice to be able to do for certain parts of it, but you don't want to do too much of it and have it lose its authenticity or take the enjoyment away from you if that's something you enjoy. So really, there's so many questions that I just thought of based on what you just said. But the first one I'll just ask is, do you think in regard to AI as it is right now, do you think we have anything to worry about when it comes to that artificial intelligence in our lives? Do you think we're going to reach a point where maybe a point of no return, where we've gone too far with it and it's breached too much where we can't go back? Do you see that possibly happening?
It's a funny point you bring up, because I really had been unfamiliar with this idea that that there are people thinking we could stop automation. I'm just not of that view, and I think it's so far outside of reality. It's hard for me to reconcile it. There's a book coming out next month, middle March, called "Battle for Your Brain." The wonderful woman is professor at Duke in philosophy and law, who wrote the book, and she describes these people that think either we can stop automation, or people think it's inevitability, among other things, other wonderful things in the book. I recommend it. I think that automation has a long lineage and will continue at a trajectory, kind of whether we like it or not. If it's not us that is taking control of these tools, the development and the application to our lives, others will. The point is for us to shape how they're going to be deployed into our lives. And we see that right now. We don't even need to imagine sentient AI or any of the sort of Hollywood dystopia visions, because we're living that to some extent with social media. Instagram is super dangerous, especially for teenage girls. TikTok is spyware for the Chinese government. Despite all the other, in addition, to all the other kind of negative personality traits that they can enhance. So we are living these technologies downsides right now. The manipulation of our media enhanced by these technologies. We don't need to stretch our brains too much, but yes, it's going to get worse in that way. Somebody asked me when I was speaking at a conference last month, what are some things that are going to continue? One of my answers is we're going to always have bad actors. And we should plan on that when we're thinking about the deployment of these new technologies. The closer we get to a utopian vision of what can be these life-saving technologies is up to us. It's up to our involvement and our ability to embrace and shape how we want these technologies to be deployed.
And jumping off of that, so the great point about social media, because those are algorithmically driven, and they show you, even if I post something on Facebook, like 10% of my friends might have the possibility of seeing it. And so I think it shows you what it knows that you're going to engage with potentially. And if you don't engage the first time, it might never show it to you again. And so it can kind of create almost a biased perspective for that person. I'm wondering your point of view on AI as we know it now. And obviously, ChatGPT is probably the big hot topic right now that people are talking about. You're seeing it on social media and news outlets about its, potential downfalls and potential benefits. But do you think that we're going to have a problem with biased AI in the future as far as influencing the minds of upcoming generations?
I do. We will have a problem with bias. We will have a problem with bias if we can't get involved enough to understand how we want this to be deployed. The characteristic right now, I used to say that AI is underhyped, and that maybe 3, 4, 6 months ago, in 2022. But today in 2023, after ChatGPT, I think this is actually the right amount of attention, because the amount of change that AI and digital transformations can bring to our world is really quite remarkable. And just now, it's really because of this massive amount of data and the ability to use this data, right? Remember, that is the innovation of ChatGPT, is that it captures something like 80% of the English language corpus. We should be surprised if it didn't create some terrific conclusions from our prompts with that amount of data. But that's the innovation. With this amount of data that's now become available, some really terrific, useful tasks can now be accomplished. And we're now beginning to see those expressions just emerging as people have these wild experimentation with different versions of generative AI. So I think we have a really interesting time right now with now being able to explore what is useful about AI during this period we're living in.
I'll be honest, Eric, I love ChatGPT. I think the amount of time I've spent with it, I continue to use it more and more and more. Within the last month is really the time that I started using it, and really it felt like I unlocked the power of like, wow, this can really help me, have a brainstorming jumping off point for a paper, or really give me a good, a quirky title for a podcast episode potentially. And I'm also wondering, to that point, what advice would you maybe give someone who wants to integrate some AI into their daily life in beneficial and productive ways? Because you've mentioned, a few times now that it's about how we, really integrate this technology and how we deploy it, with using your word. And I love that version of how to describe that, because I think it's a tool that probably could be harmful, but I really do think more likely it can be beneficial for people. What are your thoughts on how they can use it to the benefit?
Maybe just helpful to back up and give a useful definition of AI. People often will say that it is an augmentation, and that's true, but it's not really always like an artificial limb or a third arm. It's also, not really to say it's just an automation, although that's true. It's certainly not terribly helpful to say it's just statistics, although that's also true. What I think it's helpful to remember is that it's a cycle that you're sensing, planning, and acting, and then learning for the experience. I'm not inventing this definition. It's that kind of classic definition from the Robotics Institute at CMU. So sensing, that's just collecting data around you. Autonomous car driving down the road has a whole bunch of sensors around that are collecting. I just rented a car once this last week in Europe, and I counted the number of sensors on the front of the car, just the front of this car. Something like 11 sensors just on the front. So that is a car. That's not an automated car either. This was just a car I got at a rental shop in Copenhagen. So 11 sensors. So something that's taking in data, and then that goes to the network, however it does, to the kind of central planning. And that's traditionally where people think of as AI. But you have to first collect all that data. And then so the sensing, and then the planning, and then it has to act. So you imagine that car rolling down the street. It takes in all this information to say, oh, well, is that a crosswalk? Oh, is that a person? Oh, is that a tumbleweed or a shadow? And then it has to decide, well, what's my confidence interval? What's my probability that I think that there's a crosswalk and a person or versus a shadow? And then it has to act. This is separate. These are important, because it could just ignore it, or it could come to a complete stop, or it could do something in between. It could slow down. It could require driver intervention. That's an acting. So sensing, planning, and acting. And then it learns from the experience. And that's the important additional component, because that's what distinguishes AI from your traditional thermostat, where it gets to 70 degrees and then it clicks off, or gets to 70 degrees and clicks on. So it learns from the experience. And this is also important about AI. Sense, plan, act, and learn from the experience. The AI is not going to suddenly learn Mandarin Chinese. It's going to learn the different shadows of a particular intersection that may or may not include a crosswalk. That's what it's going to learn. It's not going to spontaneously learn some other domain. It's going to learn something within the domain in which it's been trained, in which it's been designed by humans. So if you think about sensing, planning, and acting, and learning from the experience, you can then make it think a better, more powerful context for the automation that you want to bring to your life. And that then gets to my advice, which is experiment with the technology. ChatGPT has some wonderful technologies or wonderful applications that we're only beginning to explore. So, and generative AI in general is going through an explosion of expressions based on what we've all learned from the OpenAI example of ChatGPT. There's generative AI for sound, which is fantastic. There's now a generative AI for programming. This is just really fantastic. My company has its own generative AI, which we can talk about. But there's just an explosion of these generative AIs, and I encourage people to experiment with these and see how they might apply to their own work. My view of ChatGPT is consistent with this meme that's been going around the past month, where really it's just an 800-word autocomplete. I think that's kind of true, but that's a short way of saying it. That's the way I might describe it to a kid. But and I know not to diminish the power underlying it, because it's a pretty darn sophisticated 800-word autocomplete. But it's also a way that can enhance a lot of work we do, just like you described, in seeding some articles, I guess you might say. The
Yeah.
downside is, in the politest way, is that you need to reason about it every time. You can feed it truth and then truth and then truth and then truth and truth, and it may give you something that's not truth. So that's one of the downsides. The way of describing it that's not so polite is to say that ChatGPT is a little bit like somebody that graduated with liberal arts, and has broad knowledge, but it's not very deep. And they can always be confident, but often wrong as well. So they don't. It doesn't often tell you something beyond the surface level knowledge. It can be super useful, but you'll find how that applies to your own work only through experimentation.
Yeah, that's wonderful advice, Eric. And I think I'm going to take that to heart and definitely continue to do that with ChatGPT and other technologies that are available to, figure out what works for you, because it's got to be a pretty individualized process to find out how AI can integrate into your life. One thing that I think a lot of people listening probably are not aware of is how long you've been doing this, how long you've been interested in working with artificial intelligence. And we'll get to your experience with the White House, because that is also just an exponentially cool feature of your bio. But bring us up to speed, Eric. How did you first become interested in artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I think it's just a big dollop of luck, that when I was growing up, there was the very first AI hype cycle, or maybe the second. It may be useful for people to think about in their heads when they think AI first came about. They might have thought 2015 or 2000 or whatever, but really it first came about in 1956.
Oh my
There were
gosh.
academics that got together at Dartmouth, that talked about, it was some summer retreat at Dartmouth that talked about what was next in computer science, and the term artificial intelligence came about really as a way to scare people. By the way, that term wasn't created as a way to get people excited about anything in particular. And the ambition then was it would comprise a research initiative over a summer. So, 70 years later or 60 years later, it's becoming a little bit more than that. But it developed into something that initially was today maybe expressed as expert systems. It was a symbolic AI. That's when I came about it in the 80s, where it had a nice flourishing, especially in healthcare, but then went through what was called an AI winter, because it didn't fulfill on its promises. Really, it didn't scale. That was the problem. You could encode a lot of knowledge in it, but as you grew to a certain size, it began to lose its usefulness. And that was the problem until the 90s, early 2000s, when probabilistic learning models were tagged onto this. So there is a non-machine learning or non-probabilistic AI called symbolic AI, kind of good old-fashioned AI, and I've been doing it. I've been doing this type of working in this type of technology as a researcher, as an entrepreneur, as a venture capitalist on Sand Hill Road, ever since then, for a long time. I was working with language models in the early 2000s, back when we used these things to detect and disrupt terrorist networks. So it's been a while.
Yeah, I thought that was particularly remarkable, just the breadth of experience you've had with it. And I didn't realize the 1950s thing. I mean, that also completely blows my mind, because I certainly wouldn't have guessed prior to the internet's, mainstream 90s type boom. It made me think of a question for you, Eric, in regard to a company that you currently are on the board for, which is Wellways. And I am a healthcare professional. I'm a trained pharmacist, and I want to ask you, what is that company doing that is so unique with the medical field?
Right. Well, Wellways is a breast cancer diagnostic, for obviously for mostly for women's health. using a physical device to detect the presence of tumors, to suggest the presence of tumors through differentiations in heat transfer. So tumors are going to transfer heat more than not having a tumor, and so a differentiation between right and left can suggest the presence of something abnormal. That's what the medical device does. The outcome of this is we are collecting more data about women's health than was ever previously available, and that's the value that I provide to that company.
Yeah, and that really brings us to your company Connexus in terms of the breadth of data that people are having access to now with these technologies. You know, you're the CEO and a co-founder of that company. And if you read the company's website, everybody listening, it's aimed at, helping companies manage this overwhelming and rapidly growing challenge of data integration and migration. So, Eric, share with us, what is Connexus doing differently than other competitors in that space? What is going to make your company stand out and succeed?
It is a unique place in the world because it's an academic spinout. And to have MIT tell it, it's their first ever spinout of their math department, which is funny to say. This is a software expression of a discovery in math. The particular domain of math is called category theory, which is related to where my academic research is in graph theory and in computational linguistics, in addition to machine learning. This category theory has a power that's really unavailable in any other domain of math, and we apply it to scale the AI technologies that had reached their limit in 80s, 90s, and 2000s. It balanced with a probabilistic AI can solve a range of really previously intractable problems in our most complex environments. The applications are anything from an energy company being able to bring efficiency, like orders of magnitude more efficiency to the operation and deployment of windmills for a better, more efficient public utility, to a financial services company who is able to use the data they're already collecting for better management of their risk, because of large financial organization for which these risk models matter in the stability of our financial system. And to another Fortune 500 company that is doing cloud migrations, but needs to accelerate that process with guarantees of the integrity of their meaning. This is all available with our AI. A way of describing this is that the explosion of data being quadratic or exponential is really well known. What's less well known is that there's an explosion of data sources. That's less well known. Also, quadratic or exponential. We talked about the sensing, planning, and acting. So if you have this explosion of number of sensors, data sources, and you have this explosion of the amount of data just being collected on an absolute basis, you then have this combinatorial explosion of connections that are the manifestation of knowledge. So you have data and data, connecting them in a model, kind of a view of the universe, a viewpoint, what have you. Think of the simplest time, just a formula in Excel. That's knowledge, what you want to do with something. That is becoming unimaginable and unmanageable. That companies can't reason about this. People can't reason about the complexity that is emerging. But an AI can. And so that is what Connexus brings to this, is we have an AI, a generative AI that can connect business truth, against which new models can be brought to bear that can immediately be detected, either for their complementary nature or their logical contradictions. And out of that, a whole new world of flexibility opens up for some of the most complex organizations in the world.
Yeah, that's incredibly fascinating. I think my mind just gets excited about where this might go. What might this become in terms of the broad scope of this type of technology? I think what your company is doing, that sounds really way out of my league in terms of understanding even. I can't really wrap my head around just having the ability to have an AI that can compile this data and organize it, in a logical fashion, much like a brain. And so I'm curious to ask you, Eric, what is the future, in your opinion, of AI and maybe robotics as well, with using your background? What might that look like in 5, 10, 15 years from now? Where are we going? Where do you see it ending up?
Yeah, I'm reluctant to talk about timescales, but I can say in a general sense, you were pretty generous in saying 5, 10, 20 years.
Right.
Where we are headed in the nearest term is that we are going to be having collaborative AIs, and we are going to be having ubiquitous collaborative AIs. You can think of an agent, following each of us around, always looking after our best interests, protecting us from any sort of digital attacks, but also expressing what we want to in the world. These chat GPTs are going to become more personal for what we're individually looking for. Interesting, in the current season of Y Combinator, there's already some companies that are focusing ChatGPT for particular needs. One I tried out today was just looking at customer service. And so what it did is direct ChatGPT just to my corporate website or your corporate website, and then be able to respond in a focused way, questions to my website using the corpus available from ChatGPT. That sort of thing is an example of new expressions that we're going to see. What do I want in the world? I want music. I want to be with my family. I want other sort of entertainment. I want safe travel or whatever. You'll have these AI agents collecting this information and then protecting you from some of the malfeasance that may be directed your way. That's one way of the ubiquitous agents that I think are going to emerge. More generally, I think that these autocomplete or completion algorithms are only beginning to show up in our digital infrastructure. My company has a particular expression of that around business truth, but these autocomplete algorithms are really going to be the next generation of generative AI. I think we're only beginning to see what generative AI can do for us. Bill Gates says that AI is going to create 10 Microsofts. I think we're now beginning to see what that looks like, and I think the 10 companies that are going to emerge out of his prediction are now beginning to be born.
That's really exciting. As an entrepreneur and as a person that talks to people like yourself that have started companies, or advising as an expert to certain organizations, it really gets me excited for, that generation of entrepreneurs that's going to have that opportunity. They have that expertise, they have that niche, they've noticed a problem and they've seen a tool they can use. It just gets my mind just blowing with excitement about what the opportunities are going to be for those people.
It's going to be a very big deal. I think, as I said, it started this conversation off by saying we used to think AI was underhyped, but I now think it has the right amount of attention. The world is becoming faster in the sense that the Cambrian explosion of knowledge, facilitated by these technologies, provides for an abruptness that is really unfamiliar, and it still can be disconcerting when these technologies don't work, and then suddenly work. They work at infinite scale, and this can disrupt people's jobs and people's livelihoods. And we have to either be participating in that, or we're going to have two things happen. One is we are going to be an artisan, kind of reconciling ourselves to a niche, and that's fine, maybe even great, but that's what's going to happen if we don't participate. Or a much, much, much worse case is we're going to be surprised, and we're going to be caught unaware of how our jobs are abruptly being displaced. That's where really no one wants to be. It can be very, very uncomfortable in all the ways.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and probably a point that a lot of people are nervous about with AI and seeing it, on the news now, more the mainstream, kind of getting that that right amount of hype you talk about now, where people are just talking about it at work now that have never thought about anything other than just what they do at home with their computer or cell phone. So I'm thinking that the fear that maybe I have, and maybe I'm thinking way too sci-fi into this, Eric, but do you think there'll be a time in the future, and who knows when that'll be or if it'll be, where we have like that sentient AI being that you see in the movies like Ex Machina, or a recent horror film that's kind of fun is Megan, the robot that can actually, feel like a human and can, possibly turn on the human race. Do you think that's something that could happen, or is that just way too out of the world to be a possibility?
Yeah, sentient AI. I have a couple answers about this. Certainly some additional texture has been added to this conversation with the recent exploration by Kevin Roos of the New York Times, seeing the dark side of ChatGPT, getting it to admit its love and try to break up his marriage. I laugh about it because it still is a computer, but I can imagine for him it was, at least as he describes it was particularly unsettling. There's a couple things to say about this. There's a kind of a practical way, and then maybe a theoretical way. I'll first say, like, in a theoretical way, among me and my friends, and I'm grateful to be in San Francisco, where there's a lot of people, let's say like me, that have kind of these rich discussions about AI in that way, and even having talked to the CTO of OpenAI, and the woman credited with ChatGPT, who's terrific, by the way. We all, I think, well, I'll say generally agree. Not that we've had these sort of direct conversations, but I think this is generally the feeling is that any sort of sentient AI is very unlikely to occur in the next 20, 30 years, if ever. Another way of looking at it, I talked to a neuroscientist at the other conference I was at recently. She had studied this from a physics of intelligence point of view. That was her view, and she found that on this continuum of intelligence, from a human to an animal to a plant to a computer, that there's a difference in that a computer is fundamentally deterministic at the chip level, and that anything that we see that's more biological will probably form the basis of a sentient AI, should that ever emerge. What I noticed in her research is that she was distinguishing our brain from our spinal cord, our brain being probabilistic, our spinal cord being deterministic. And we have these reflexes executed by our spinal cord before our brain even it becomes aware of them. It may not be any accident that our bodies have both. And so we might actually find that future intelligence expressions of sentience have both a deterministic and a probabilistic viewpoint. So both maybe a chip and a biological component to them. So those are just some theoretical viewpoints. I would say, as a more practical matter, maybe like Nick Bostrom at Oxford wrote in his excellent book that Elon Musk often parrots, talking about the danger, kind of the existential danger of sentient AI. We can spend some amount of our thinking process about how to protect ourselves, and I have some thoughts on that. Nick Bostrom was a smart guy. The book was excellent, but I don't think that needs to overwhelm our thinking. And this is why, in addition to the concept that it's unlikely, I'd say that despite all that, there's a lot of risk today, and there's a lot of risk in the short term. Even if an AI isn't sentient, the degree to which it can simulate sentience, the degree to which it can fool ourselves or draw ourselves in a way that, and manipulate us in a way that we don't want to be manipulated, that deserves some attention. Here you and I are speaking with hopefully with clear minds, but if you get jet lagged, Eric, I might be more susceptible to, or tired in any number of different ways, more susceptible to, some sort of computer that is trying to manipulate me. But it may have nothing to do with sentience. It just may be manipulative. And so we can be concerned about this way before it becomes some sort of thinking machine on its own.
Right. Yeah, I think that really clears that up, even just in terms of the level of maybe worry that I had about that being a possibility. It does make me at least feel better that, experts that you've spoken with and and your personal opinion is that it's possibly never going to happen. That to me is reassuring to hear, and it really just kind of makes me think too about the way it affects governments and the way it could impact, like we mentioned, bias and different ways that it might impact the way that people judge and perceive situations and come to conclusions. And you had experience serving under the Obama administration as that presidential innovation fellow for the AI and Robotics, in the executive office of the president. So I'm curious to ask you, and maybe you can't disclose this or maybe you didn't experience it, but were you able to have conversations with people in that space that, they're forward thinking about how this, how to prevent, this from being a threat to national security?
That's mostly where I spent my time.
All right.
Although I really had as my job working with my peers around the executive branch in energy and state and health and human services and so forth, most of my time was spent in defense-related work. And there's innumerable threats and opportunities available in there. AI is often brought up as a fear for autonomous weapons, robots walking around with guns, and that's real. But I think where AI is going to be more widely deployed is in command and control. That new weapons are going to be invented, and new threats are going to be presenting themselves with such speed that it's the AI itself that's going to have to reason about the situation in order to feed to the commanders about how to respond. It's a threat that is going to be addressed in a couple of ways, and maybe I can say a point on that. There's this concept called formality, kind of a technical term, which is that we will have these foundational truths represented by mathematics as a proof. That's going to have to expand at a base level beyond where we currently have it, which is in semiconductors. It will find its way up the technology stack. It's what's going to have to be developed in order for us to ultimately have a provably deployed military-grade blockchain. It's what's going to have to be deployed to have workable quantum computers, among other things. And it's what's going to be deployed more and more for AI in larger organizations. We're going to have what's called a formal cloud. The cloud, it's worth remembering, was originally invented to support the needs of e-commerce and digital advertising. I had a company doing statistical arbitrage that was approached by the Wall Street Journal as one of the first companies to use the cloud for commercial purposes as a startup.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It was a long time ago. We decided not to do it because we didn't want to attract attention, but we were really happy at the time because we got at the time when this meant something. We got hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of computing power for some fraction because we were able to rent it from Amazon instead of buy it. Which was the fashion at the time, what was available at the time. This is going to become, just part of the world in which we live. That we're going to be leveraging this technology.
Yeah, I think it kind of comes back to the overarching theme of the conversation, or part of the conversation, is just deploying this technology in the right way. And I think it's a tool in the right hands, used the right way, can be of great benefit to the human race. And so obviously the opposite's probably true too. If in the wrong hands, maybe there's things that it could do that we don't want to have happen, and hopefully they can develop it in a way where maybe it can prevent that, have some safeguards. At least that's where my mind goes with it. But Eric, I've got one final question for you as we wind this interview down. Just want to ask you broadly, is there a myth about artificial intelligence that you want to debunk on the show? Something that as the expert is just not true, and you don't want people to become false believers of it?
I think we touched on this a few times, but the one that I might like to remind people of today is one that we hit on and is just part of current events, which is that what ChatGPT tells you needs to still be reasoned about. You can't trust it. You certainly don't want to be trusting it with your life. So if any sort of critical circumstances perhaps it just may be your career, not your life, is at stake. You need to take its conclusions as a first draft.
Yeah, I think that is incredible advice. And I've seen that firsthand with my experience with it is you do have to fact check it. I've asked it questions about pharmacy that I know the answer to, and it occasionally will spit out, it'll say answer B is correct. I'm like, oh, I know it's not. So, I mean, you check it and you find out it's not true. So, yeah, Eric Daimler, I think that is great advice. I really appreciate your time on the podcast today. And I will tag everything in the show notes, the links to the companies that you mentioned, the link to the company that you currently are the co-founder of, Connexus. And Eric, as we close, how can people best reach you if they want to contact you about your expertise?
I think connexus.com, our firm, or on LinkedIn are probably great. And yeah, you can follow me on this podcast and other places I'm participating. I'm going out to Colorado tomorrow morning.
Well, safe travels, sir. That sounds wonderful. We'll tag this on social media. And yeah, Eric, really, really excited to just continue to follow your journey. And I think that the things that you're doing with your company it's really inspiring to me. And so I wish you the best of luck with success, sir.
Oh, thank you very much, Eric. It's been fun.